Hi, I'm Steve, the host of the AE Vol 4 podcast, where we're going to talk about all things of the AE enterprise. I have two guests with me to talk about AE 102, Patient Movement System. First is Eric.
Hello, my name's Eric Spicy Nielsen, Captain, MSc, Product Manager, maybe Doctor. I don't know. What else you got? Footballer?
Yeah, I think that's good. Let's go to our next guest, Megan, Marty. Go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
I'm Marty. I've been a nurse for 14 years. I've been doing AirVac for 6, and I started in the Coast Guard as law enforcement. About 17 years total. And I have two little boys.
Today we're going to talk about the patient movement system as a whole. As a patient goes through the system, through the Army, whether Navy, Coast Guard, and then eventually into the AE system. So the first question is for both of the guests. Let's start with the basics. In the world of the action-packed medical dramas, what would the patient movement system's thrilling tagline be?
Probably go, it's better than walking.
That's a good one. Meg, I know you're a big fan of...
I'm so glad you didn't tell me that before.
She wanted to know earlier.
She's a big fan of taglines, so what do you got?
I'm not. I actually think taglines are stupid. But
okay, that's fair enough.
AirVac loves the AirVac. We bring them back.
She has a tattoo.
I got tattoos across my butt.
All right, so that's what we're sticking with. All right, so who are the unsung heroes? That one's on you, Eric.
Probably say a lot of the support functions, like the loggies, radio operators.
Oh,
Did I
my
steal
answer?
you?
Yeah.
The BMET.
Don't look at my notes.
I think you can.
Got those.
I think you can expand on it. Though.
There's others. So like all the C2 assets, like they're always just tasking us like, hey brother, we need you to move this patient, or you get this tasking, and then if you're in the AR or if you're a crew, you're like, oh, again, I gotta go. But without them, like none of this happens. You never really hear or see them, meet them, unless you're in trouble.
Yeah, that's spot on.
Yeah.
Meg?
Yeah, I think the theme is it's anyone but the flyers. The unsung heroes are the loggies, the people that just jump in there. Sorry, sweet. The ground folks who will pitch in anywhere that's needed, but they make sure we have the supplies. They're tracking our expiration dates. The BMETs, we carry life-saving equipment. If it doesn't work, it's not going to save a life, and they make sure it's always calibrated. And when it's broken, they fix it. So, to me, those are the guys and gals.
That's fair. Eric, tell me about the patient movement system and the process, and who are the key players?
Yeah, this was touched on a little bit in the last video, so I won't get too much into it. But the patient movement system is essentially just the process and all the intricacies, interagencies, and people to move a patient from the point of injury to the echelon or level of care that they need to get to. So whether that's sprained injury, you just need to get off the front lines, or whether it's a complete battle wound, you need to get all the way back to the States. So it really just depends on who it is, and then the key players within that is everyone from the validating flight surgeons, SG, operations side of things, the clinical side of things, the med groups, operations groups. So there's a lot of it.
So, Meg, what are some key considerations sending facilities should prioritize when preparing patients for movement?
So sending facilities have a huge responsibility. They are coordinating all of the care and validation through the validating flight surgeon to make sure that these patients are, for the most part, stable on the ground and that they're not going to decompensate rapidly in the air. And if they are or at risk for decompensation, that the AE team has the adequate resources to deal with that. And sometimes it requires balancing that risk because sometimes they are at risk for becoming decompensated in the air, but to keep them there would be far worse. They deal with all the logistics, so they've got to make sure we've got the supplies that we need, equipment, medication, everything for flight, usually for the whole flight, and these patients can be in the system for like a week, days, weeks at a time. And if we don't have it when we leave, we're probably not going to get it. So the better that they can help pre-plan for us, the less we have to struggle when there's an unforeseen circumstance. And then for me, the biggest component for a sending facility too is dealing with patient education. Prepping the patient so that they understand what's going on. They're not super anxious about it, because an anxious patient in flight can be really dangerous to the crew, and it's not as easy as just talking with them or playing a card game, because you're in the back of an aircraft, so oftentimes you're screaming at one another, which can escalate what they're feeling. So the more you can prep that patient before they get to the AE team, the better.
Okay, I feel like you answered my next question of any unique challenges in the AE process. So you talked about the specific in the air, but is there anything in the process of evacuating patients that you find that are unique or challenging? And Eric, you can answer this too if you have something.
I mean, communication's huge. And you don't have it really. Like, we wear headsets so the crews can communicate, but communicating to your patient, communicating to the front end crew, the load master, if you gotta like get up and go, it can sometimes be a challenge, but we all recognize that's like the most important thing. From a nursing perspective too, you lose one of your key assessment skills. You have no ears in the air, so you can't listen to lung sounds to see if this is a pneumo. You can't listen to heart sounds to check if it's a tamponade. You can't listen to bowel sounds. You lose that aspect. So you got to rely on other tools. And then when you put on top of that, you can't communicate as well with the patient. It becomes really challenging. And then the environment we work in is it's unsafe. It's dirty. You're tired. We work really hard. We play hard too. And it's just stressful. You're not always in welcoming, more in the AELT realm, but you're not always in the most welcoming communities. You can be in a pretty dangerous position, so you got to be a professional about it and get the job done, but that wears on you.
Yeah, so you mentioned communication as a challenge. So Eric, what component of communication through the patient movement process is the traces piece? Can you explain that?
That was a great segue. By the way, fantastic.
You're
I
welcome.
will say.
Cheers.
Yeah. So the traces. I need to spell this out. So traces is Transcom regulating and command and control evacuation.
That's a tough one
system.
too.
Yes, it is a long word. There's a 2 in there for C2. But traces essentially is the system that tracks patients throughout their journey to wherever they need to get. So point of injury, if a Metagroup or MTF or a cache or any of these Navy, Army, Marine stations, if they ever need to move a patient, either the beds where we're filling or their patient's just de-escalating, and they need to move them, then they will put forth that PIMR or patient movement request into traces with all the relevant information such as vital signs, information as far for their background of their injury, demographics, specific information about their service, like what rank they are, their social DOD ID, so we can track them, what unit they're from, all this kind of stuff. So that way, when they get to likely the role 2 from that role 1, or maybe even the role 3, depending on where they're at, at that point in time, the validating flight surgeon can take that and say, okay, this patient is safe for flight. We'll track them at this MTF. We'll go pick them up with this crew over here, go pick them up, and then we now can track them throughout their entire system, both for just patient movement, some billing potentially,
Mhm.
operations.
Gotta get paid.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So you mentioned about the different roles. Is there something that happens prior to them being evacuated in the AE system? Like say if they, were a Marine or they were a soldier and they get hurt, is there someone that takes them prior to us? Because I know we do long range type transport. Can you answer that, Meg?
Is there an app for that?
Is there an app for that?
Yeah.
Traces. It's terrible.
Yeah.
It's not
No,
an app,
he can
but
answer that though.
I can answer that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
An
AELT stuff.
Okay.
Yeah,
I just pick people up and I put them down.
Okay.
I hope. Get ready to let people pick.
Yeah,
picked
Eric,
up.
go ahead and take that. Explain
So,
the rest of that piece. I know you really got into the different roles, but like what happens prior to that to entering the AE system? Because I know they don't just magically show up at our door, right?
I'd probably say 75% of the whole process is outside of AE's purview, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
So point of injury, maybe I can use these gummy bears as like example. So this
Yeah,
segment
there's your
presented by
camera.
He really
Rebo.
wants to use.
Yeah, he wanted to do a whiteboard, so we couldn't do that. So
We
we're
could do.
just gonna do this.
We'll do a separate Coca-Cola presented by later. Okay, so you got these gummy bears. Let's say Joe Schmo is over here in Island Chain 1. We'll
Ooh,
go.
Okay,
We'll go
we're going
China,
there. Going
yeah,
to New War.
instead of 20 years ago. So he's over in Island Chain 1. He gets hurt in combat. So now we're gonna move him from Island Chain 2. Owie.
Maybe bite his head off.
Yeah. So he's down there. He's on the ground. So now they'll likely take him to within a golden hour. He needs to have some kind of care. They'll either have medevac or Cassivac, get them to likely forward surgical team or a special surgical team that's usually attached with the Army, Marines, or Navy, and they'll pretty much provide life-saving support until they can get them further in the line. So we got Joe Schmo. You've got now probably a doc, maybe some nurses taking care of them to make sure he's living and breathing and surviving.
Probably some medics.
How's
not some
your
nurses.
pain?
Medics, yeah.
Yeah, the nurses or the
Yeah, we're
medics
back
do
at the
work.
hospital.
Yeah. I think it's like 6 people a part of these normal teams, but modular. So I know the Army's looking at ways of scale in the future. But so now he's safe and within that golden hour. So now he's got to be moved from the Island Chain 1 to probably the second Island Chain or maybe even further back in the chain. So it could be TACIVAC. So 45-minute flights on a 130. We come in, we pick them up real quick, and we get out. Could be AE, might not be AE, might be a helicopter, might be the Navy. We don't really know. Could be train. If it's not in China, could pretty much however we can get them out of there.
Could be the Coast Guard.
Could don't go that far.
Not likely.
Yeah, don't go that far. So once they're likely at the M2, roll 2, a little bit more capacity, then you usually start to get a little bit more into the regulation piece, assuming that trace is online. If it's degraded, maybe you have comm outs, then you have a tux form. I can't remember what it stands for, but that's where Excel really comes in, and I get sauced. Like I'm ready to go.
I appreciate you
Yeah.
We need
answering that
people
because I was
like
thinking
him.
about like what if happens there is no traces because we talk about degraded. Yeah, good
Yeah.
good with that. Our comms are out, so we talk about that. What do we do?
Mhm.
That's Eric's jam.
People are like, "Oh, tux, it's like the Kool-Aid man. I'm coming in like Excel." So it's just this like, you can print this out. We usually have them in ALT kits, but it's just like patient injury expected. Like we'll probably have a classification on it. Like it's very basic stuff. And then I've seen it everything from like maybe the nurse might just give it to the helicopter person who's ever on a helicopter. They might just send it out, or maybe in these AE crews, you might just get a paper form and 30 patients.
So we're going old
Good luck.
school with that. So
I'll
If,
recognize
if you're
your
lucky,
work anywhere.
Yeah.
I'll leave notes.
Eric
I'll leave
made
notes.
that.
yeah, I think that's good with that. Meg, can you discuss the information exchange that occurs during patient handoff? So he was talking a lot about like going through the system and going to the different roles. What are we looking for? What are we trying to get? What are we asking for? What's the magic behind all of this?
In some ways, it's similar to a hospital, right? You just want to know the overall summary. What brought them to the medical facility, or what was the injury type? What was the final determination, if there is one, or diagnosis? And then why are they being transported? I think that's the biggest question. For the more regulated patients, you sort of want to know which service is taking control too, whether it's ortho, gastro, cardiology. In case those unforeseen circumstances arise, you need to know who you're calling to bed down the patient and get additional orders. It's really important in flight that you have a good grasp on what their ground vital signs are. So, for example, if they're already hypotensive, or they have a low O2 on the ground, you can anticipate in the air they're going to need something. So knowing that in report can help you to get orders before you're up in the air and you have nobody to call. I mean, you have someone to call, but it's a lot more challenging. And then finding out, did they come with what you expected? And here's where the magic happens, because in AE, you have to understand and respect that what you're getting is the best of what you can get. So if they're coming,
But we always want more.
we always want more, and that's okay. But understanding that if they're coming from a roll one, they're probably not going to come with a cardiac monitor because one, the roll one might not even have one, and if they do, that's their only one. So no, they're not going to give it to you. I don't know why you're laughing. These are good answers.
I changed cameras.
Yeah.
I just
Okay.
wanted to get his perspective on
It was like
your
The Office.
conversation.
They're distracting
Yeah.
me.
It's part of the show.
So making sure they have the equipment if they can give it to you, but also not berating the person who's giving you report. Because a lot of times you're not getting report from a nurse. You're getting it from sometimes not even a medical person. They might be wearing flip-flops walking out to the plane.
And we've had that before, and sometimes it throws you off because what we're taught is like you can only, when you drop off a patient, it has to be higher echelon of care, it has to be someone of higher level. And then so when someone comes out and you're like, was that even a medic? Like, they have no clue what they're talking about. Like, can I do this? Is this legal? Like,
You really got to be comfortable in your own skin, especially as the second flight nurse, because you are in charge of the medical scenarios on the flight. So you get as much as you can in patient handoff, but the magic comes with working with what you've got. If you're already halfway through your mission, that's all you're going to get. If you haven't even started your mission and you're able to pre-plan, then maybe you can kind of fill in some of these gaps. But ultimately, you're not going to hold up the mission just because you're waiting for a glucometer because the paperwork says you're supposed to have a glucometer. Our call's going to be made, sure, but ultimately you got to get up and go. The other issue I always struggle with in patient handoff, I'll be honest, is the medications because they need to be documented in Zulu time. You know, you might be coming from Japan and I'm coming from Hawaii. We're on two different sheets of music. So when you say you gave the medication at 8 o'clock, was that local or Zulu?
it was PM.
Yeah, so there's a lot of public math that goes on there. So that's difficult, but it's really vital to ensuring that the patient's getting the same standard of care. And it's a piece that I'm always harping on when I'm getting report to make sure that I know when those medications were given and when they're due. And as much as I hate Zulu time, you have to do it in Zulu.
Yeah, it's necessary.
Do you expect some of these to be an issue in whatever future state we're in if it's a New Zealand crew that gave medications, like, or maybe an Australian crew on the ground, or maybe they have different equipment, maybe they have different
Well, that's
timing wise.
that's part of what we're looking at now is as we expand into places that we've never been before, and we're going to be operating in those island chains, and we're going to be crossing a lot of different time zones. It's just what you said, is we can't expect 100% on everything. We need to be prepared, and we need to be okay with 80% or 20%. We need to be ready for disaster and just work with it, right?
I mean, the magic happens on our end because we get what we get. We don't get upset and we just move on. And so if they're handing us equipment that we're not really sure about, hopefully they know what it is. So I'm going to take 5 minutes to be like, how do I turn this on? Can you show me what the important buttons are? Or a medication that I'm not used to, but what is it? Is it an antibiotic? Okay. When did they get it last? So you just have to quickly come on that same page and, put egos aside and move on because we're here for the patient and we're here to get them in and we're here to get them out.
What about as an operations officer? Do you feel like there is something from your point of view that we may not be aware of that's magic that makes this whole process work? There's your plug.
Excel. No, I'm just kidding. As an operations officer and previous liaison team, I would say there's a lot behind the sausage, especially like the Army side, the Navy side. Like, there's a lot of interesting things that go on. And when you go to visit some of these bases, like, we really do only see a piece of the PMS, the patient movement system. So maybe the Army they can't give away their litters because they're not going to get them back.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Maybe the Navy can't go within their city and go to the airfield in military clothes because they're now in a separate area and they can't leave the base with their uniforms on. Or
It may not have 3 days worth of medication.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
And then Dom Ops, not to throw another wrench into the
Yeah, there you go.
But now Dom ops, now you're going from traces to JPATs, and now you're going to ESF8, which is emergency support function. And now, depending on where you're at, the different FEMAs have different policies and way in which they do things. So it is really like the unexpected. So as an operations officer, you have to just keep up and hope for the best and do your best. So you strap in and grab a Haribo and run with it.
So you kind of started to go into the concept of unregulated operations when you started talking about Dom Ops and just going out in the island chains. I think this next question is really good for Meg also is, can you explain, because you mentioned it too. You said something about regulated patients. So what does it mean to have an unregulated mission or an unregulated patient? Can you explain that for us?
Unregulated is my jam. We could have a whole podcast about unregulated
I think
patient
we're gonna.
movement. Perfect. So, good segue. AE, as we learned, was started out of a necessity, and then it evolved to this highly specialized, highly regulated patient movement system. And we rely on that because in AE, inherently, we work in an unsafe environment. So we assume very little risk, though, when we have our regulations, we have our, pre-validation, we've got our orders, all our ducks in a row. So we're not really assuming a lot of risk there. But over the decades, with the wars in the Middle East and the Air Force and other branches really pushing boundaries, how far can they go? How remote can they go? Knowing that they've got the air and medical capabilities.
Sorry, I did it again.
I hate you all.
I did
Stop
it again. I'm so
laughing.
sorry.
Laughing at me. They're really pushing those boundaries. And one of the reasons they're able to push the boundaries is because they know that they've got medical expertise in the air ready to evacuate them and get them to a higher echelon of care. So that's really where the unregulated patient movements come in. You're assuming a lot more risk because they're not regulated. So we still have guidelines and CONOPS that I'm sure you guys will go into that help mitigate the risk. But the goal of unregulated is speed and agility. And if we don't nail this in the next decade, we're really going to become obsolete in AE. And there's, the DOMOP situation. I mean, this is, I think, historically where we've seen the most unregulated because you've got people in an unsafe environment and you just got to get in and get them out. They're not regulated. It's unregulated. It's as many people as you can fit in the back of the plane safely-ish. But again, you're assuming that risk. So that's really where you're going to see officers start to deviate and take risk. And they need to know, their left and their right boundaries, but they need to also make decisions that they might be uncomfortable with. So we're starting to practice that. I could go on forever. I love unregulated.
So you kind of talked about that we have to be faster
Yes.
and accept more risk and be potentially modular. Do you think that AE as a whole, we've become too big and too slow? And do you think that's by default or by design?
I'd say it's by default. I
Okay.
mean, we started modular, right? Like we learned about the history and where AE really came from. And then we realized we had sort of a lull in the wars, but we still had this incredible capability. So we fine-tuned it. But in that fine-tuning, we didn't really have a massive need for AE because the war was fought differently than it was in World War II, right? It was smaller, more intense casualties. So that's where we sort of honed our skill set and built these regulations around that. And we just sort of fell into this lull. But things are changing and, a 5-man team is not needed. You can do just as much work, almost streamline it better with 3 people and really be quick, modular, get in, get out. And you just have to trust your team and trust that the Air Force has given you the training that you need. And that's where the Guard is always going to be better than active duty because we have our civilian experience to draw on. Active duty doesn't have that. It's one of the things that sets us apart, and that's why we have more reserve and active duty.
Well, this is going
AE.
on YouTube, so they'll see this now.
Good. We're
So
better.
yeah.
Shout out AMC.
So this question is for Eric. I know you've deployed as a liaison team. I know you like to prop that with the patch and everything.
I do.
Do you have, with all this experiences, do you have anything that you wish people that didn't have this experience, something that that you can give them some knowledge, some takeaway points?
I'd probably say outside of what I mentioned earlier, and that I feel like each branch kind of does it differently. So maybe the Army, I've always kind of equated it to like the Army's doing soccer dribbling and soccer passes. Like they're making small, short incremental movements. Maybe
Mhm.
it's like helicopter from a couple miles or ambulance. Whereas like we are doing like a Hail Mary. So we're sending them from the end from the beginning to the end, like in one fell swoop.
You had to do a sportsing thing,
Yeah,
didn't you?
I had
Okay.
to. Shout out ESPN. You're on
Mhm.
Sports Center. You know? So yeah, each branch does it differently, and each location is going to do it differently. You might not catch the same thing at every place. C2 is different at every place.
Mhm.
People swap in all the time. So catching either training early or being flexible enough to know that you might not get the same kind of handoff at every location or even the same location multiple times. So you might get different equipment, different medications. And now, especially as we transition to more or other partnerships, NATO, the N5, I can't remember the name, with like New Zealand, Australia, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
I5.
five eye.
I5. Yeah.
Backwards, yeah.
So as more like partnerships, state
Uh-huh.
partnerships or national partnerships, they just might not be the same.
So we overall we just need to be more diverse. We need to understand the world around us and play better with our friends. Right?
Mhm.
Okay, so I think that covers most of what we wanted to talk about. But I want to do a quick lightning round with the two of you. It's called this or that, and I'm going to give you two different phrases, and you're going to pick one and give me a quick why. So just off the cuff. Look,
I
look,
didn't prepare
She's
for
they're
this.
going for the notes.
I'm
Well,
not
that's
ready.
she's
I'm
not
not
ready.
ready.
I got it.
that's part
I
of the
asked
thing.
you what this meant. Nobody answered
Yeah, we didn't
me.
want to prop you on this. So, yeah, you can both answer. I can put you on the spot. We'll see how it works out. So this or that, care in the clouds or ground game coordination. Meg,
Ground game coordination.
and why?
I thought it was going to be seasickness.
I don't
Yeah.
get seasick, Muff.
All right, daytime dash or nighttime navigation. Eric,
Nighttime navigation.
oh,
That's what
I
I
should
was
say
gonna
that. Yeah, tactical turnaround or strategic success.
Anyone who's known my Coast Guard stories, tactical turnaround.
It's a dance.
Okay,
Mhm.
all right. Army agility or naval precision.
Naval precision. I answered for you.
Okay, no answer.
Army
Okay.
agility.
Start a fight. Battalion aid station handover or in-flight transfer.
In-flight transfer is easier to say.
Okay, that works.
Yeah.
Frontline frenzy or command center calm.
Command center calm.
There's no such thing.
Mm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Joint force juggle or unified unit movement.
Unified unit movement.
These sound like dance moves.
I don't even know
Is
what
it
that
just
means.
me?
Fast with those responses.
Yeah.
I know.
All right, last one.
Shit or get off the pot. Let's
Oh,
go.
All right, supply chain shuffle or personnel puzzle.
Supply chain shuffle.
And why?
Because it said supply chain and I got a shout out to my loggies.
All right, what? All right, well, that's it. That wraps up AE 102, the patient movement system. I appreciate both of your time talking about this awesome topic. It was fun. Thank you for your service. And
It's a pleasure to serve.
all right,
Ballin'.
bye.
Thank you.